Hello, and welcome to That's Just Human. It's a podcast where we explore all aspects of being human, that's living in a human body and dealing with life's obstacles. I am Elisha LightAngel. I am a licensed massage therapist, and I have bukus of life experience and several years living in my own human body. And I also bring other people to share their stories as we explore different experiences and simply what it's like to just be human and have those experiences. Today, I am very excited to introduce you to one of my friends for a really long time. And she's one of my goddess friends, and I love her. She's been such an inspiration and has the coolest healing story. And she's here to share with us today all about that. So please welcome Jessica Hitch.
Oh, hi, Elisha. Good to
Hello,
see
hello.
ya.
I'm so excited to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
So, I met you in, I think, 2013. That's sounds about right.
Yeah, I can't believe it's been that long now. It seems like just yesterday, practically.
Yeah. Um, so we met at a ceremony, and um, then as I got to know you, kind of told me your story. And so you are currently dealing with a couple of autoimmune disorders.
Just one that I know of, but that one's bad enough. It's rheumatoid arthritis, where your body attacks its own self, especially the joints, which can be really disabling, make it hard to use your arms, your legs. You don't really notice the joints until they stop working, and then you realize, wait, they're everywhere.
Yeah, that makes sense. So when did you first learn that you had rheumatoid arthritis?
It was when I was 27, so that's 12 years ago. I just remember I would have random pains. Like I'd be bicycling to school and it hurt so bad, like I would start crying. And there was one Thanksgiving, Christmas holiday where it got especially bad, and my mom was like, I think you have arthritis. And I didn't really even know what that was, but she's like, you need to go to the student health center. I did. I had to do a bunch of blood work and tests, and they diagnosed me as having rheumatoid arthritis. Yeah, so I've had it now for about 12 years.
Wow.
Yeah,
How
although
long?
looking back, there were some signs even earlier than that.
Yeah. So can you tell us about your now hindsight epiphany of what kind of signs you were experiencing?
Yeah, so like I was on drill team, which in Texas, the drill team does lots of dance moves at the football games. And so one of our biggest moves, which I still can't believe I did, was you jump up into the splits in the air and you land in the splits. And so I remember there was one week where I couldn't dance because my knee got really stiff and swollen. And I just kind of sat out the week and, thought, oh, I've been dancing too hard or whatever. But now that poor knee is like having the hardest time of any joint. I was also a community organizer, so I went door to door for the environment. And there was one day where it was like my legs just locked up and I couldn't go to work. And I just chalked it up to, oh, I guess I've been walking too much. But looking back, like both of those things were probably early signs that
Wow.
there was something worse happening.
Yeah, that makes sense. I really feel our body is giving us clues even when we're completely oblivious to them. So part of the journey of life is learning how to decipher some of the clues that the body is giving, or at least know that, hey, this isn't what it should be doing, and paying attention to try to investigate further, especially to find a root cause so it can be addressed. And if there are symptoms, then maybe those symptoms can go away, or maybe not.
Right. Right. Yeah. Now, like, I believe so much in the body's wisdom because it's like the mind can have thoughts and beliefs and it can have its own wisdom, but like the body goes deeper than that. Like, the body is like our most primal part. And so now I'm all about like listening to the body's messages. But in retrospect, I'd had a lot of trauma. I'd dissociated. And in a lot of ways, I think the pain was my body's way of being like, wait, I still exist. Remember? Come back into me because it started this whole process of having to reconnect with my physical body, which meant having to reconnect with my emotional well-being. And, it started kind of like a therapeutic healing process through the pain that was probably important for me to experience. And I don't think I would have escaped being so dissociated if my body hadn't like called me home by being like, wait a second, I'm here, I need attention.
I really like that perspective on pain. I had never thought about it like that. Um, I've experienced dissociation and getting back into my own body through different things that have come across my path, but mine hasn't been through pain. So to evaluate and realize that that is asking you to address something even deeper, like more than just the physicality, is um, that's pretty wise.
Well, yeah, and what else I found about pain? A lot of it's emotions. Like, I'm a Reiki master, and so I'd seen this in clients where, just in general, the thing our society, people in our society don't know how to handle emotions. We're taught from a young age, oh, those emotions are bad, those are good, and taught to be like polite and civilized and kind of mask and hide our true emotions. But in healing, a lot of people would come to me, and that's exactly what they needed to do. They needed to address their anger or their sadness or whatever. And so I started to realize a lot of times when my pain pops up, all I have to do is say I'm willing to experience this emotion. And then out of nowhere will come some uncomfortable emotion, like an anger or a sadness. And I swear I've done it sometimes. And the second I feel that emotional burst, like the pain signal just stops and it's no longer there.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've tried affirmations too. Like when I have the pain, I'll ask myself, what's an affirmation that could help? Whatever comes to mind, I love myself. I love myself. Like I'll repeat it. And doing things like that, I've actually felt the pain release and diminish multiple times with those techniques.
That is fantastic. Now, do you just say those in your head or do you verbalize it out loud?
Usually just in my head. It kind of depends what I'm doing. Like if there's people around, I'm just probably going to chill in my head. If I'm by myself, I might say it out loud. Especially if it's like an affirmation I'm working with really deeply. I'll go to the mirror. I'll say it over and over again. I'll keep saying it through the tears and the anger and whatever blocks until like my head is nodding and I have a slight smile. And I'll look myself in the eye too, because I've heard that takes it deeper when you're actually looking at yourself. So like if I'm really into doing the affirmation, that's what I'll do. But otherwise, I'll just say it in my head, think it and poof, that pain will be relieved for the moment.
That's pretty incredible. Now, have you shared this with anyone else and see if they could replicate the same technique in themselves?
That's a good idea because I haven't really mentioned it that much, but that would be cool to see if it works well for other people too, especially like the emotional part. So I don't know, next time I come across someone in pain, I should definitely ask them if they're willing and open to it to see if that helps them.
Yeah. What a great experiment because that could be an entire technique that could help so many people out there that are experiencing pain for a variety of reasons, but any of those can all go back to something emotional that's manifested in the body.
Right. And it's not to say like if there's a physical cause, we should ignore it either. Like, like let's say somebody had a dental issue and tooth pain. I'm not saying don't go see the dentist, like don't go check on that part. But a lot of times too, I've noticed like with Reiki, they teach you biosen scanning. So in Reiki, the biosen is the sick chi. Our body is made up of energy, and if the energy is not flowing right, you just run into discord. And so you can actually scan the energy field, and based on the feedback you get in your hand, you can tell how sick the chi is, how big the block is. And the worst level is when you start to feel pain in your hand. So if I'm scanning a client and there's something really wrong, I'll start to feel the pain in my hand temporarily to alert me, like, hey, this chi is blocked right here. Then I started to wonder how often does the pain come into me when I'm feeling my own biosen and my own sick chi? And so then I started to realize too, the pain randomly triggers what I can do with Reiki, find the edge where the energy is blocked, let the Reiki flow and help the pain too. So I found in a lot of cases, actually, the pain is telling me, hey, your energy is blocked right here. It needs some energy work.
Wow. That's really cool. I like that.
Yeah, that was cool. But I was like, hold up. Like, if I feel pain on other people's bodies when I'm doing energy work, maybe the pain's telling me something about my own. It was kind of like, ding. Okay, cool.
Wow, neat. So, um, that's obviously been a part of your healing process. And I definitely wanted to talk about some of the things in the past 12 years that you've done to address the issues that your body is giving you and um, and kind of what that journey has looked like for you.
Yeah, it's been a journey of humility, which I think is one of those things like they tell you to be careful to pray for patience, because if you pray for patience and it's answered, you come across situations where you have to be really patient. So I think it's like one of those gifts where it's like nobody actually asks for humility, and the process of getting it means you'll be humiliated essentially. But you know, you
Mhm.
can still gain from that awareness of like our place in the world. And so what happened to me, like first there were random pains. They made it a little hard to do things here and there. And before long, like I was limping, like then the next thing you know, I could barely walk. Um, then the next thing you know, I'm bedridden, like to the point where every day going to the bathroom was like so hard, even just to stand. I started wheeling around the house on an office chair to make it easier. Eventually, I ended up getting a wheelchair so I could at least get out of bed. Um, and actually, like first it was a push wheelchair, so somebody else had to do it because my arms at that point were so painful. It was so hard to even use my arms. And thankfully, somebody out of the blue, I didn't even ask, just told me, look, I have an old electric wheelchair at home from my grandmother. We don't need it. I'll give it to you because they're freaking expensive. And when all this went down, I was in graduate school. So, you know, the whole poor student trope was at play. So I was so grateful he gave me this mobility scooter. And so for a while, I don't know, I tried different medicines, but like the first thing, as soon as I felt the pain, part of me was like, wait, a practice, like, what exactly is it even going to do for me? And so I connected to my intuition, and what my intuition told me was paleo diet. And I'd never heard of that. I started looking up, there's actually an autoimmune protocol of the paleo diet, and it cuts out a lot of foods that now I know trigger me, like nightshades. I was living in New Mexico, everything was salsa. Tomatoes are a nightshade. Like that's probably one reason it activated. So I switched to the diet, and I tried all sorts of treatments like physical therapy. God, I tried what's it called, where they dilute like homeopathic medicine
Mhm.
did not
Yeah.
for me for this. Um, and I tried some Western medicine too. And for a while, like I went into remission. Um, I went back to graduate school in my mobility scooter, but then graduated able to walk. So, like, over the course of study, I was able to become strong again. And eventually, I got off all medicines and I lived for years without much issue. Like, I would still have a pain here and there, like, probably more pain than most people, but I was functional. I was able to walk pretty far. And, like, if I pushed it the next day, I could kind of tell, like, my ankles would be stiff or whatever. But, you know, I was still getting along. And it wasn't until I caught COVID um, a few years ago that all of a sudden weird things started happening again. Like, this thumb can no longer do the thumbs up anymore.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
it can only lift that much. And when I
It's a
call
sad thumbs up.
it's a really sad, yeah, I hate it. I'm always like, I gotta use this hand now because it just won't do it. And my doctor was like, yeah, even though the year before she told me, whatever you're doing, voodoo, I don't care, keep doing it. You're doing great. After COVID, she was like, actually, you need to go to the rheumatologist. And so now I've been trying different medicines, and unfortunately, I've had a huge flare starting back in August. So even though I went, I don't know how many years, 8 years without help and pretty able, now I'm back in the mobility scooter again, dealing with all this pain, trying to find a treatment. And so it's definitely frustrating because for a while, everything was pretty okay. But I got back to the point where it was hard to walk, even just a few steps. And
Mhm.
you, it's amazing how fast that changed, too. If I'd seen you in August, would I have predicted that a few months later I'd be in a wheelchair and unable to do like a lot of tasks? No, I was like walking around at the beach, like having a great time. So
So did you just wake up one day and you were in a lot of pain, or was it a slow transgression over maybe a few days?
kind of slow. Like at first I was like, huh, my knee's kind of stiff. Oh well. And then the next thing you know, it's like, ouch, my ankles really hurt too. And then before you know it, it's like, oh God, my arms, like my elbows, like I can't lift the bed sheet over me because it's too hard. The funniest was when my grip was so bad on my hand, I was like one of those claw machines you get stuffed animals out of. Like I kept trying to pick stuff up and it would just fall. Like I couldn't even
Oh
do
no.
it. Yeah, so it's been tough. I'm fortunate. My husband has been very compassionate and caring. So when I was struggling the most, like he was there brushing my hair, um,
Oh.
cooking for me in the morning, and all that type of stuff. So I'm really lucky because I met people who had rheumatoid arthritis. Their family left them, their friends left them. They're just like, this is too much, and they were out. So, I mean, at least I have the support of people I love in my life. But I'm trying to get to the bottom of this flare. And I do think that emotional component and the stress came into it again because stress, hurts the body. And with my autoimmune disease, I feel like any stress my body is just extra upset by.
That makes sense. Wow. So have you been using the same technique as like since August when this has flared up about asking um that what emotion is this dealing with and seeing how that.
Sometimes, yeah, I feel like that's best when it's like a random pain, like a smaller pain. With this, I got hypnosis from my friend, who's a hypnotherapist, which really helped get down to actually how my body, in a lot of ways, was protecting itself um, through
Mm.
creating the pain because it made it so I couldn't go out in the world where I might get hurt. So we uncovered this like subconscious, unconscious reason. And I've also been doing a lot of like meditation and self Reiki. Um, it's been a gradual process, but bit by bit, I am getting stronger. But yeah, some days the pain was so overwhelming. If I tried to do the what emotion am I feeling, it would have been like, I'm freaking depressed. What do you mean, what emotion am I feeling? Like, this is the worst ever. And so when it's like pain everywhere, I feel like that technique doesn't work as well as if it's just like a random, oh, my wrist hurts right now. Like, what's going on, sort of thing.
Okay. Interesting. So yeah, it's going through all this again. So you are trying Western meds right now. Are they just kind of are they doing a process? Because one of the things that I've noticed with my partner who has a different autoimmune disorder is that they seem to have to prescribe something because insurance says you have to do this and then you can go to this next thing if that doesn't work and then if that doesn't work. And some of the stuff seems absolutely nuts with the side effects that come along with them.
Right. Yeah, I know. And that's one reason why originally I was super hesitant to try. After what I've been through, even those side effects don't seem as bad as living with the quality of life that I had, where I could barely make it to the bathroom in my own house or get out of my bed. Um, but I know, like, it's really nuts. Like, a lot of my doctor will use their medical, awareness to say, hey, this is what you should take. Then they call back, oh, actually, insurance says this is what you should take. And I've had to push back, like, no, I don't want to take that. Or, oh, I've already tried it, to get them to give me what the doctor thinks I should have. Um, so, yeah, that's definitely frustrating. Plus, the cost of it, at first they'll come back like, oh yeah, these biologic medicines that you self-inject cost $1,500 a month. And it's like, whoa, 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 and then they have these like special patient plans if you become a part of, they'll give it to you for free essentially, but you have to know to like try to figure that out. So that's overwhelming. I've tried a few where I definitely had side effects. I got off them quick. But now, like reading on message boards, like, and when my doctor saw my finger, she was from India, and she said, the only place we still see this type of stuff is in my country where they don't have as much access to these medicines. She said today, people here don't end up with the joint deformities and stuff like that because the medicines are helping. And so that kind of made me think, okay, I'll give it another shot, but the list of side effects is so long and the number of like things they're trying to make me try is so big. Like I don't even know if I know where it's coming from, why, what exactly it is. It's just, yeah, it's like higher likelihood of catching cancer, or getting cancer, and there'll be like risk of stroke and like all this stuff. It's just like super extreme. But I guess you just kind of got to cross your fingers and hope like not me.
I mean, I think that goes back to what you said is that with some things, the side effects are worth it for the quality of life that you're gaining that you didn't have. And um, and not everybody experiences pain like this. So I think it's really important for people's empathy and compassion to understand what it's like, and everybody's body is different, and making the decisions on how to deal that. Personally, I think the kitchen sink approach, you're what you're kind of doing anyway, which is, you're going with some Western meds, and then you've got meditation, you have your other techniques, and just combining, throw it all at it. It's the kitchen sink.
Yeah, and that's what it seems like the medicines do too. It's like, oh, we figured out this one that turns the inflammation down a little, or here's another angle, because they basically like make the immune system weaker because it's overactive. And so then you're at risk of like infection and stuff like that. But I mean, they've only been available for the past some odd years, like not even that long, these forms of treatment. And, I look at like the spiritual aspect of it too. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with the story of the goddess Inanna, like descending into the underworld.
I've heard of Inanna, but I'm not familiar with the story. So please share.
Okay, yeah, so like the gist of it, she's this powerful goddess, but she goes down to the underworld to see her sister, who I guess is like the queen of the underworld. And as she goes, like at each portal, she's stripped of something else. So like first, it's her beautiful crown, and then, maybe her jewelry, and then her robe. And so like by the time she gets down there, she's basically stripped of all of the things she identified with before. And I don't know if I'm remembering the story correctly. I think she ends up kind of like dying and being reborn at her sister's hand. But like it kind of made me feel like Inanna, because it's like all this stuff I had is just slowly stripped away. And then after everything's stripped away, including even your ability to do stuff, it feels like you're ready to be reborn as something different, because the process of having everything stripped away changes who you are, how you think.
That makes a lot of sense. How have you dealt with, I guess, your own identity as you've gone through this?
It's been kind of tough because like I did an inner child meditation and they said introduce your inner child to yourself. And I thought she was going to be afraid because I'm sitting there in a wheelchair and like my hands are kind of funky looking, but she didn't care in the meditation. She just came up and hugged me and I was like relieved, but there is a feeling of like way more being self-conscious, right? Because like my body looks different. I have joint deformities, like, or right now I'm walking, if I walk at all, like I walk like a hunchback, or I might have a cane, or like I might walk really slow. So there's more just like awareness of that. Although in practice, whenever I go out in this mobility scooter, people are like extra nice to me. Like it almost feels like they're nicer to me than when I'm not in it. Um, so that's not an issue, but another issue is just access. Like there can be like a bump in the sidewalk that means I can't go over that part of the sidewalk, or like there was a ramp I wanted to use, but people had dropped all these bottles there, and that's another part of the challenge. Is like how do you physically go to these locations if you need help with like a mobility scooter?
Yeah, I've heard from other people that use mobility scooters that that's one of the issues. And I've even observed knowing this, like sidewalks in the town, and our town has random sidewalks. Like you'll be walking and then all of a sudden there's just no sidewalk anymore. But, two more lawns down, there's some sidewalk. So it's really random. Or the sidewalks um, are just really uneven. So it's even more than a bump, like where they have the patches, the ground has just shifted and moved everything. And um, and I believe grass. A lot of people cut their grass and they don't blow it off of the sidewalk, which can be an impediment for somebody that is in a wheelchair or even someone biking or on a scooter because the wheels can have issues with the grass and then make it slippery.
Wow, yes. I mean, it really makes you think about like how we affect everyone. Because I'm sure the people cutting their grass aren't thinking, I want to get in someone's way. It just happens that's what it does. And so, I mean, it really makes you realize how like everything we do affects other people. And I'm just glad, like here in America, the Americans with Disabilities Act passed in the 1990s after the Capitol crawl, where you can look at pictures of like a little girl crawling her way up the Capitol because they didn't have ramps and they couldn't get access. And so, because of people like that protesting, at least, public spaces are meant to have accommodations. And I know in other countries, like, that's not the case. And so, at least I'm dealing with this now in 2025 and not much longer ago or in some place without, laws put in place to help people with wheelchairs.
And it could be better. I have heard about that march. I haven't seen any of the footage from it, but I've done a little bit of research to know how the ADA became a thing. But even now, what is really appalling is there's no people that are really put over or in charge of making sure that a place has that. So it's literally up to somebody to call in and make a complaint that they went to a business that was not ADA compliant to then become investigated. But there's not ever going to be anyone that just goes past maybe the first building inspection or something and then says, yeah, this needs to be changed or you need to meet these qualifications to be compliant.
Wow, that's interesting. I was looking into it a little bit because I was surprised when I was traveling, like there were a bunch of stores that I just couldn't get into, and I was looking, I was like, I guess if I really wanted to, I could sue them or something like that. But I'm like, geez, I don't want to get into all that just to be able to go into a store. Like,
Yeah, you can just make a complaint to the ADA, and then at that point, they can send someone out, and then they'll probably be given a certain amount of time to change whatever it is that they need to change to qualify for the compliance.
interesting. Yeah. Huh. That's interesting. And I mean, I guess the place that makes the most difference is the parking. Like that definitely makes a huge difference. And I've heard of people with rheumatoid arthritis like getting kind of heckled if they use handicap parking because like if they don't have a visible mobility aid, a lot of times we look just like everyone else, even though you can't see the pain and see how we're impacted. But since I actually have the chair with me, nobody gives me a hard time, um, which is good. It's already hard enough.
I've heard that about a lot of different people's things going on in their bodies that you can't see, but it's felt internally. And so I would love to see us being stripped of judging other people. And I think the thing that ruins it is when there might be a person out there that isn't actually having any issues and they take advantage of something. And so people kind of will be more triggered by that and then just assume someone else is doing that. So it is hard to gauge, but it's also none of your business.
Right. It's that good reminder, like you never know what somebody else is going through. But I've seen that with service dogs too, because I do have PTSD, and so I use a service dog, and like I was at Big Bend where normal pets aren't allowed. And so these people saw me with my service dog and they're like, oh, you can bring dogs? I'm like, well, yeah, if it's a service dog. They said, oh, we just have to buy one of those vests, right? I'm like, well, and have like a reason to have it, which I wouldn't wish upon you at all. And I felt kind of rude for saying that to them. But I even ran across a guy who I went to a show with my dog, and he's like, "Oh yeah, this vest on my dog is fake. I just bought it so I can bring him with me." And people really hate the fake service dog thing. Like, it's against the law to do that, but I guess some people just really want their pet with them and do that anyway.
Yeah, it is a disservice to the people that need the service dogs to pretend that you have a need for a service dog. And it is irritating. There's things put in place to help benefit everybody, because if everyone was breaking the rules, then it'd be a lot more chaotic. So some people think they're above that, though, or they just feel like rules are being imposed upon them and not understanding the broader picture.
Yeah, which I mean, I could get behind questioning the purpose of rules and not wanting authority over you. So I could definitely understand that mindset in general. Um, but I'm just glad I have an actual service dog. He helps me out so much, and it's the type of thing where it's like people want to pet him. I say no. They keep trying to pet him. I'm like, no, seriously, don't. And I don't think those people understand that like those kinds of interactions with somebody with a service dog can actually cause a lot of problems for them. They just see like cute, fluffy animal. Um, so a lot of times though, I run into people too, like kids whose mom is like, that dog is working. Make sure to ask if you can pet. And so it's nice to know there are also people who are like aware, they're not quite pets. You got to be a little more conscious about how you interact with the service animal.
Yeah, that's so true. I'm glad there are some parents out there teaching their kids like this is different than just somebody's animal. But I think you should ask to pet an animal anyway, because you don't know if it's aggressive or not.
Yeah, just in general, that seems like the nice thing to do, polite thing to do, just ask, can you pet? Because it's true, it might be a scary dog that's going to bite.
Yeah, you never know. I mean, animals can have trauma just like humans. So someone could have just rescued a dog, and that dog might they're not acquainted enough with the dog to even know if it's safe for other people to come around and pet frequently. And it's just it's a safety for everybody.
Right, yeah, yeah, which it's so true. I think I have something to add too, because you asked me earlier about like how it shifted my identity, and a lot of what I've thought is, oh, I do this healing practice, and I'm a healer. And for a while, the story was, wow, look how far I've come. I've healed myself. Like things are going well. But now that the story is like, well, gee, I did all that, and it's also getting bad again, and I've got to go through this again. It's definitely made me question, like, can I even call myself a healer? Like, is that even part of my path? And it's definitely sent me to some places and spaces that are like, I don't know, I don't feel so great. And so, I mean, I'm still hopeful I can come out of it, but it also brings into play the like human doing versus human being,
Mm.
because, we're taught, hey, work really hard, go constantly, be a human doing. Like you're a success if you do the right things, if you do enough of them, if, you do them well, you're a success. But we're not told like, hey, being who you are is enough. You don't have to do, even if you can't do, just the fact that you exist is enough reason to have you here. But rheumatoid arthritis teaches you that, because some days you can't do. And so if you can't love yourself when you're a human being, what's the point of being a human doing? And this disease just like brings that home, that it's not about what you do, it's about who you are. Because what you do could be taken away like in any instant.
Oh, wow. What a valuable lesson. Yeah. So you are highly intuitive, and I think a lot of people struggle to tap into their intuition. Have you always been intuitive, or is it something that you developed in as part of your journey in life?
Yeah, like when I got through college, I had 2 degrees. I'd gone to like a math and science. Well, I'd done all this academic stuff, and I pushed myself so hard to develop my logical mind. And that's when I went, wait, I got drawn to like meditation and other philosophies. I'm like, there's this whole other part of my mind I haven't even tapped into, the intuition. And so I said, hey, why don't I try that? And it's been a lot of fun, but it's definitely different from the logical mind because a lot of it is just learning to trust and to hear your intuition and to validate it. But now that I've activated it, like I do psychic readings, and it still blows my mind what information I can get that really has no basis, like no logical basis, but instead, maybe it's the claircognizance where you just know something. Um,
Yeah.
or like the clairsentience, where like I could feel how somebody else is feeling. Um, and clairvoyance, where like I'll get mental pictures that help me understand what's going on. Or even just like when I asked myself what diet would help, I was so right. I'd never heard of the paleo diet before ever, and it just randomly came to me in my intuition. And so I've gotten really into meditation, and I think that helps because you open your mind to have space to receive the intuitive guidance. And I've studied with different like psychics and channelers, and I read a lot of books about like how to strengthen the intuition. So I definitely like took an active role in figuring out how to make that open versus like, oh, I've always been that way.
Yeah. I think more people could take up meditation, but then also tap into their own intuitiveness because it sounds like your ability to tap into your intuition has been a key factor and part of this journey for you and dealing with the pain and then finding different things that your body is needing for that moment. And even now, what it needed then might be different as you move forward.
Right. Yeah. And I always say, like, a lot of times our intuition is really demonized because other people want to control us. So if we can't get the answers from ourselves, we have to look to some authority figure or somebody out there to tell us what to do. But in reality, we can connect to our inner wisdom and our inner knowing, and it'll tell us what's just right. And so I really like to combine the intuition with the power of prayer too throughout all this. Like, the worst moments, there's no other choice but to pray. It feels like everything else is going terribly. I do a lot of goddess spirituality, and I connect to the angels and enlightened guides. And so I'll just pray for whatever it is I need. Give me help, give me courage, like give me resources. And I feel like I've been connected to specific doctors because of the prayer. Or maybe I find, a website that helps or something. It's not always like immediate, but that's something I'm really sure has helped me is just putting out there that intention, that prayer, that request, like this is what I need from spirit. And then, trusting that there's a divine loving source out there that hears my prayers. And I've definitely seen some cool healings, although I've seen the bad side too. Like I was limping into REI to buy new shoes, and this guy comes out. He's like, "Oh, let me pray for you. You're so sick." And I'm like, "Okay, fine. You pray for me." And I'm standing there. I'm like literally in pain. He's like, "What's your pain level?" On a 0 to 10, I'm like, I don't know, man. I'm in so much pain. I don't even know how. He's like, "Well, okay. Well, I guess I'll just pray for you then." I'm like, "Yeah, can you hurry? Like it really hurts standing here." And he prayed. He did some prayer, and then he looked at me. He's like, "Are you better now?" And I'm just like, dude, I wish it was like that. I wish your little prayer, yeah, oh my God, I could throw off my shackles and dance. It's like, no, man, I'm not better right now. So he had a good intention, but that was kind of comical because it's like, I mean, miracles could happen, I suppose, but I wouldn't expect them to immediately happen because of a prayer.
Wow. I guess sometimes people really feel inclined, but like you said, they're being good intentions. At least they have a good heart and desire to help somebody that they see in pain.
Right. Although that was one time where I'm like, okay, I'm really not blending in here. He could tell I'm doing bad enough that he thinks he needs to pray for me. So either way,
Aw.
it's true. Having that good intention is still nice. I'd way rather have that than somebody making fun of me or saying something mean or like any of those things. So
Absolutely. Well, we're coming to the end of our time together. So I want to know if there was any bit of wisdom that you could leave the audience with, what would that be?
well, I can't claim being the origin of this wisdom, but it's from the Buddha, the teaching of impermanence. And so everything changes, whether it's good, whether it's bad, it's going to change. And it's one thing that's inevitable. So, like, if you're somebody who's in a lot of pain right now, you can be glad because it's going to change eventually. Like, nothing lasts forever. But then, on the flip side, if you're somebody who everything's working really well right now, you feel great, that also will come and go. And so it's learning to be detached. And I have found you can still be happy in the dark times by cultivating happiness. So that's the other gift of this disease, is even when I was suffering very much, I still could find ways through my practice to cultivate happiness. So that's a gift we all have. Like, no matter what we're going through, happiness is within. It doesn't depend on external causes and conditions. And so if you're able to, like, consciously generate that, it can go a long way.
That's beautiful. Great wisdom. Thank you. Well,
Yeah.
it has been really great to talk to you, and I've learned even more about you. I've known you all these years, and this has been insightful, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me and share your story with other people. And you never know who's going to hear this and take something from it to help out in their own life.
Yeah, it's so good to see you. And that would be my hope because I've benefited from so many random videos and things I watched online that helped me. So, if anybody gets any help from this, that would be amazing.
Yeah. Well, thank you for listening or watching if you're on YouTube. And you can subscribe or download and share any of my podcasts with somebody that you think needs to hear it. Leave me a review on Apple iTunes or Spotify. That really helps get this out to more people. And remember to be kind, be you, and remember that everything is part of the journey.